This is what he said to Mike Silver on Mike's podcast. Open mic.
But what do you do if you're them now?
Well, I start Jimmy. He has won a lot of games. I can't say the same for Trey, right? You don't know that from him. I don't think it's hard. I think you just start Jimmy.
The hard part is that Jimmy has a no franchise tag clause and he's a free agent. So you got to really show him the love to try to get him back.
He still won a lot of games before he got hurt, right? And so he put him in that position to be able to go on that run to begin with. So you handed a guy a team sort of like somebody else I know got handed a good team. So you got to go with the guy who's been winning the games and gets the offense and go from there.
Who was maybe I always stop pressing play. Was he talking about Steve Young got handed?
He's taking a shot at Steve Young. That thing will not die, John.
Got handed a team?
That won't die, and Steve and Joe seeing themselves in every quarterback situation for the rest of their lives and seeing the other one in the, like they each see themselves and the other guy. And when you sent me that clip, I thought, oh, does Joe see himself as Trey Lance? Like that's what I thought I was about to watch. But no, Joe sees Jimmy Garoppolo, right? That's who he identifies with. And so that means that Steve has to be Trey and Brock in some weird way.
And Josh Johnson. He represents every single human.
He's just every other challenger.
Tom Brady, if he shows up, Tom as well.
Yeah. The irony is Steve was drafted much higher than Tom or, Brock Purdy was. But
Steve won a fucking MVP when Joe was injured. He was the passing champion.
Yeah.
Steve Young and Joe. Jimmy Garoppolo should love every time Steve or Joe, even when they misrepresent who they are, ever compare themselves to him specifically. Because both of them have nothing in common with them besides playing quarterback. Because if either one of those guys existed, Jimmy would have been thrown to the wolves years ago. Those guys, it's just hard. I get it from Joe's perspective. This is the thing when you're an athlete, right? No matter how many business deals Joe had success in or what happens in his life, from 40 to however old he is now, late 60s, that's just, the most, it doesn't get any better than playing quarterback in the NFL. That's the area where and obviously he's getting asked about it, but feels like it's still pretty raw.
It does. It does.
It's like, what do you guys think of 95-7 in the game? Like, I don't give a fuck. I don't know. That's my first reaction. Like, what? But their reaction
really got you talking.
Yeah, I mean, I throw some jabs, but ultimately it does not care. It's something that has been beneficial for us, leaving or whatever, right? It's not beneficial in Joe's mind of having to be traded to the Chiefs, even though he had success.
Well, he thinks he should have at least another Super Bowl, if not two, right?
Yeah, potentially, I guess.
Like on a basic level. And I remember you and I.
Because maybe he'd tell you if I was the quarterback in 93 or 94 for the 49ers, we win both times.
Absolutely. And if you watch the Peacock Montana doc, which if you haven't, highly recommend, great off-season or in-season watch, but there is clearly still bitterness there, especially from Joe, right? So and by the way, Silver's face during Joe's takes is also great. Like Silver has to not disagree with Montana. There's one clip in here where there we go. He's like, oh yeah. Again, if you're watching, you can see. But let me take Joe's side for a second, just to say Joe isn't fundamentally wrong in that Jimmy has won a bunch of games. Trey hasn't won really any games. And Brock has won.
Houston Texans one game.
Yeah, a game. And Brock has won a fair amount of games. But, and I do think, I was thinking about this the other day, I wasn't thinking about what's, topic-wise coming up. I was just thinking about this conversation after listening to that clip of Joe. And I think one of my takes moving forward is, like, this is not over for Trey Lance. As much as you and I think a fair amount of people have clearly seen there is something there with Brock Purdy, there is still a long way for Brock to go to establish himself as an unreplaceable NFL starter. And the door, if you're Trey Lance, like there is still plenty of reason to get up and work your ass off every day to try and be the starting quarterback of the 49ers. So I do understand from Montana's perspective, even though I disagree with him fundamentally, I do understand from his perspective, like, I've been around this thing a long time. I've seen what it takes to really be a long-term winner in the NFL. And the only guy that we know on the 49ers that can do that is Jimmy Garoppolo. He's not wrong about that. Now, where I would disagree is I'd say, well, I've watched Brock. I think we've reached the ceiling on Jimmy and it's time to pivot. But, that doesn't mean that in 5 years we don't look at Brock and you're in the same spot you were in with Jimmy, where you're just trying to upgrade because you need somebody who's a little more talented. We have to be open to that possibility.
I just don't think the one thing Trey is going to be unable to do, and this is where Joe and Steve, they both kept getting their opportunities in games, and Steve had to prove himself. Like, Joe was always established, right? So Joe, the offseason, whatever, it just was about health or not health. Steve did have to prove, and I think his first year starting, wasn't he like second the MVP and led the league in passing, and the second year wins the MVP? Like, Steve was immediately successful. The only way for Trey to kind of be like the Phoenix and rise from the ashes or whatever is it just irrelevant what the Excel spreadsheet says during these offseason practices. It's just not going to matter, right? It just is not. And it might on that individual day to talk about it, but in terms of his standing, he would need to do it in games, which where I would agree with you is like at any moment is proven guys just get the opportunity. But when you're given that opportunity, can he have back-to-back games where he goes like 25 of 36 and throw 3 touchdowns? Because I would say right now, the team doesn't believe he can do that. That'd be the players, given that Barros or Mayoko last week was saying, like, if Purdy's healthy, there's a massive problem if he ain't fucking starting as a quarterback. And I was reading Barros's Q&A, was kind of like, yeah, I mean, Trey can get all the snaps here in OTAs, which he's going to, assuming Thomas doesn't come back as well. He wouldn't have to come back. He'd have to get signed, and that would be probably the biggest story in the NFL. But we're a long way from that. That if he's cleared, I would imagine in the next week, we're going to get some clarity of like Purdy is given into his opinions. He's having the surgery, and the plan is to have him back, start a training camp. He's the starting quarterback. So it's just, there's no, or would Kyle go open competition now? Because he's not tied into Brock's the starting quarterback. But to me, if he's healthy, he kind of is.
He definitely is. I think Kyle, even to me, it's a situation to the point where even if Kyle wanted, for whatever reason, to let Trey Lance be the starter, I don't think he can do it. In the same way that
we can't name him. I'm just saying, like, could they kind of split reps?
No, what I mean is I don't think he can do it because I think it would cost him equity with his players in the same way that like a vet tends to get the first start when there's like a younger quarterback. It happens more in college than the NFL where like the senior gets the first start and then the sophomore who had a good camp, now the coach works him in. I think that's what Brock has earned, that Kyle has to give him the benefit of the doubt, even if he thinks it's 50-50. And I don't think he does, because of the way his players feel. Mayoko said something the other day that was interesting. He said he spoke to a Niners player who told him that after the Bucks-Cowboys playoff game, a lot of the talk in the locker room was how Brady didn't look great. That was what the Niners players were talking about.
You know, one theory I had that's propped up in my mind over the last week, seeing like Fred and some of the guys talk, is we always assumed when the stories, and they weren't rumors, they were facts, players were like, we want Jimmy back, we don't see it with Trey. I assumed, and I think a lot of people assumed, offensive guys. I think there's a decent chance some of these more vocal people might have been on the other side of the ball.
Jimmy Ward. Sorry, I don't mean to.
Yeah, but Fred, whoever. I just mean defensive players who know what it looked like seeing in practice, like, this ain't going to work, Hoss.
Well, especially in practice where the running isn't relevant really as much, right? You just got to throw the ball.
I could see the linebackers having, and I'm not just saying Fred. They got 3 linebackers that got a pretty good idea what shit looks like, good, bad, against everybody. And they go, yeah, this wouldn't play, man.
Well, whose job is it to fuck with the quarterback? The safety and the middle linebacker, mostly, right? Like in terms of like the mental aspect of it. That's what the chess match is.
And they can just see like this ball, like that ain't going to work in the league.
Yeah. congrats.
And Kyle would be like, well, part of it, not everyone's as good as you guys, so it would work against half the teams. But yeah, you're right.
I'm the difference maker when the game starts, right? That's what Kyle's saying too.
Debo's like, I agree, Fred. Actually, Debo wouldn't say that. He was nowhere to be found. He was out with fucking Dandy, doing who knows what. Weirdest holdout in the history of holdouts.
I don't request a trade. I don't remember that. And not only did he request a trade, he showed up in an all red suit to sign his contract. Yeah, I mean, I guess the ultimate question as it relates to Montana is there any part of Joe's answer that is not couched in like something personal? And should we say, hold on, even though it's easy to look at Joe and go, Joe is just talking from his own, this is just like a proxy situation for his own experience. Is there anything that should make us take pause and say, this is Joe Montana talking, even though it sounds crazy for Jimmy Garoppolo to be the quarterback of the 49ers again, and he's not going to happen. Is there any part of this we look back in 5 years and go, you know what? That wasn't as crazy as we thought.
Well, I think the conversation is going to officially end in terms of like in 15, basically almost 40 days, 35 days, he's going to be officially on another team, which has not happened. Even last year when things got weird, he never left. He was never traded. We are going to get finality of like, well, he's the Raiders quarterback or he's the Jets quarterback. So there'll be an interest, and people, definitely everyone that listens to this podcast, no matter where he goes, you and I personally, we're all keeping tabs. He's just one of the more fascinating players in the league to begin with, but he's going to be gone. Like he is. Last year, they never said it felt like he was gone, but ultimately he just never left. They were pretty adamant, partly because they know it's over. Like he's signing with someone else. You and I discussed this the other day. Like it's probably happening that feels like a deal that gets leaked during that, whatever they call it, the moratorium, that kind of like 2-day window or whatever.
Yeah, March 13th.
Wouldn't you be stunned within the first couple hours of like the official process? He's not officially signed somewhere.
Yeah, the only thing that would hold it up is if the teams that want him also want Derek Carr, and they want if Derek is a hotter commodity than him, that would hold it up.
And the Rodgers trade maybe is like in flux. There is a trickle down effect. I hear you. But once the quarterback, like once Rodgers plays out, I think there's just a